You're in the place where mysteries and the missing meet, where conspiracies lurk around every corner. Welcome to the Deep, Dark Truth.
Welcome back to the Deep, Dark Truth. I'm Mary Sanderson.
I'm Winifred Sanderson.
I am...
You're Sarah Sanderson now. It's the only one left.
Sarah Sanderson.
This didn't shake out by accident this way, for the record.
I'm totally Sarah.
It's Halloween season, so we're talking about weird deaths.
And today, Chip is talking about the toxic lady that he has been bringing up multiple times, and I only have a vague recollection of what this is. I know that I saw like some Vice-type adjacent documentary on this years ago, and that's all I remember is that she was a toxic lady.
Don't you know that you're toxic? There, got it out of the way early.
I like how you knew the exact legal limit that we could say on this show without me having to tell you or edit it out.
Of course.
Thank you.
We've been doing this for, 2, 3, 10?
We started in 2019.
We did, didn't we?
November of 2019, so...
We technically predate a pandemic. And with that, let's get started. In 1994, Gloria Ramirez was a 31-year-old woman with cervical cancer in Riverside, California. She had only been diagnosed with stage 4 cervical cancer 6 weeks before her death.
Already, it's sadder than I remember it being.
Yeah, it's not going to get happier. I see conflicting reports of whether she had already started chemo/radiation or not. Most things said she hadn't started any sort of treatment, but some said she might have started chemo.
I feel like that's important in terms of her toxicity, but that's okay. We'll talk about it again later.
There's only so much knowledge we have on the science bit. Anyway, on February 19th at approximately 7:50 p.m., the fire department and an ambulance arrive at Gloria's home. She has an irregular heartbeat and is having difficulty breathing. She also reports having been nauseous and vomiting for the past few days. The ambulance drives her to Riverside General Hospital emergency room, and on the way, she's put on a heart monitor, she's given oxygen, and has an IV put in. They drive, everything's normal. They arrive 25 minutes later. Gloria's conscious, but lethargic and answering questions a little incoherently, so she's not really all there. She also has a rapid heartbeat and shallow breathing. They give her various medications that are normal for doing things in the emergency room, including Ativan, Valium, lidocaine, and others. And later tests would show that she also had drugs in her system, including Tylenol and camapazine, which is, however you pronounce it, it's an anti-nausea medication, which makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so multiple staff members report that they smell a garlicky/fruity smell, and that her body appears to have an oily sheen to it. You know, in a very short amount of time, they're like, she's getting worse. So they ventilate her.
A quick little pause right here. Some of you may recognize this story not from its actual news story, but from a Grey's Anatomy episode. So a Grey's Anatomy episode was modeled after this, which is part of why I'm having so much trouble remembering. I'm like conflating them both in my head, and I'm not sure which was that episode and which is this.
Also, there was an X-Files episode apparently based on this. Haven't seen it.
Huh.
Can't tell you anything about it.
Wow.
I bet my grandfather has. Rest in peace.
Gloria's getting worse, and she's ventilated by Maureen Welch, a respiratory therapist. An IV is put in by Susan Kane. When Susan draws blood from this new IV she's put in, she detects an ammonia-like smell. She passes the syringe to Welch, who also smells the ammonia, and Welch will pass the syringe to Julie Korchinski, a medical resident who's working.
Interesting. Already, I'm like, okay, well, it's airborne because the respiratory therapist, but also the fact that they're smelling something, they're not poking themselves with the needle. Like, there's no blood contact.
Not that we know of.
Even a phlebotomist is completely gloved up when they're taking your blood or doing an IV.
So it gets passed to Korchinski, who notices manila-colored crystals in the blood.
What?
They're very small. They look yellowish. And they're in the blood. And that's upsetting. So the nurse, Kane, who had taken the blood, she passed the syringe on and leaned over to smell the ammonia to figure out where it's coming from. She, takes a step back and then proceeds to faint. She faints, she falls down, she gets caught by, I think it's by Ochoa. And, she wakes up because that fainting, you just wake up instantly sometimes. And she reports that her face felt like it was burning hot.
Clearly inhaled too much ammonia, right?
Or something. And so they pack her up and put her on a gurney and roll her away from Gloria. Then we've got Gorczynski next, who reports feeling lightheaded and queasy. She leaves, I'm going to go sit down. And when one of the whoever's went to check on her and say, hey, how you doing? She faints. And she starts having convulsions and apneas. Apneas being when you stop breathing for a little bit.
Oh my gosh.
Jesus.
That's when Welch, the original one, the one who ventilated her, is now having convulsions too.
So how many are out now? 3?
We've got 3 big symptoms. And then unclear when the rest of them are reporting symptoms, but those are, the big ones. At this point, the doctor in charge, Humberto Ochoa, orders the evacuation of the ER. All the rest of the ER patients and most of the staff are taken out to the parking lot, and there's just a crew of, it didn't specify, but a small crew left to try and save Gloria.
Yeah, there is emergency protocol for any kind of pathogens like this. And I'm guessing at this point that they start fully gearing up masks, disposable robes, the whole 9 yards at this point.
Anecdotally, probably true in some capacity. All the doctors and everyone who went out into the parking lot with the other ones, we don't know what's happening. So they all have to strip off their clothes and bag them, and they're just providing patient care in their underwear.
Yep, decontaminate.
So that's fun. That's a fun image in your head.
I mean, when you think about the amount of bodily fluids that regularly are getting on your scrubs, I know from experience, it can be a lot sometimes. And so you would think that they would have lots of clean new scrubs, and they wouldn't be doing patient care in their underwear. Weird vibes.
I vote, the reason I say anecdotally is because I'm not sure that probably, lasted more than 5 minutes or happened for a lot, but it's just a funny image. So,
Yeah.
So, Choa orders everyone out, and it's just a few of them who stay and try and save Gloria. She's intubated, and she's given more drugs and defibrillated, but she does not survive, and the doctor in charge, Ochoa, declares her time of death at 8:50, which is about an hour after they showed up at her house.
How absolutely horrible.
Yeah.
She's worried about trying to beat cancer, and she doesn't even have a chance.
And it was diagnosed late, stage 4, real late.
Yeah.
But it's not late, because
What
she's
kind of
31.
cancer was it again?
Cervical.
See, that's what's weird too. If it was colon cancer, like the Grey's Anatomy episode, or intestinal cancer somehow, I don't know, just the gaseousness aspect, it's just weird to me. Even with blood infections, like sepsis, and then having lingering blood infections that you have to take antibiotics for. Respiratory, it has to be completely separate from the cancer, maybe not separate from potential chemo. It just has to be another thing unless there's some kind of breakdown of other organs. Like if it metastasized and went to the liver or something, and then it's excreting, you have the liver excreting. I'm in medical mode. I'm sorry. This is actually annoying. I didn't mean to.
This is why we're here. What is the podcast?
So your liver secretes toxins when it's in peril or shutting down. Okay, continue on.
In total, 23 staff members of 37 who are all present report at least one symptom. Of those 23, 5 were hospitalized.
Wow.
One, Sally Balderas, who wasn't directly involved, but she helped move the body after Gloria died, spent 10 days in the hospital experiencing apneas.
Holy shit.
Wow.
But the one who got it the worst was Gorczynski, who spent 2 weeks in intensive care.
Was that the respiratory therapist?
She was the medical resident who noticed the crystals.
Okay.
2 weeks in intensive care, whole long list of shit, including apneas, hepatitis, which is liver inflammation, pancreatitis, pancreas inflammation, and a vascular necrosis, which is when bone tissue is deprived of blood and starts to die.
What the fuck?
She had this a vascular necrosis in her knees so bad that she would be on crutches for months afterwards. It's unclear how long she was there before, it started going wrong, but everything describes it as she quickly is going wrong, and she was only there. She got there at 8:15 and was dead by 8:50.
I mean, the ammonia makes sense because infections produce ammonia, but not to the extent of attacking someone.
I can understand somebody getting dizzy. I can understand
But she could have had an infection in her body for a decade. I mean, it could have.
It's such wildly different symptoms. I feel like being nauseous and apnea and liver toxicity are just not, if you gave me those symptoms.
And why is it just leaking out of her veins as they take her blood out?
Did they do an autopsy?
Shockingly, they did 3.
Okay, go on.
At this point, we get into the, how do we explain this? And the answer is we don't. Hazmat team arrives at the hospital around 11 p.m., and they search the hospital for, things they expect, or things that they don't expect, and they find nothing. Nothing that seems to indicate anything that could be anything like this. It's cleared by 10 a.m. in the morning.
Had she been removed by at this point?
During all this time, she was put in an airtight casket and, double bagged and put safely away, and anyone in this hospital right now is in a hazmat suit. And when they get to the autopsies, all 3 of them, they will be in hazmat suits, and they will be in a specially designed room to make sure the gas doesn't leak out, because they have no idea what's fucking happening.
Just so that we're on the same page, this is the kind of shit that you do so that you don't start a pandemic. This is what... If this was done 3 years ago, we'd be living very different lives right now. And I'm bitter as fuck, but also good job for not unleashing this on the world.
I mean, it's a mystery. Did either of you ever read The Stand by Stephen King? Or see The Thingy? I don't remember.
I did see The Thing.
Well, the prologue, the very first thing that happens is they're in a government facility and the alarm gets hit that something's broken.
Yeah. And then the toll booth worker and it's a, yeah.
Yeah, and the toll booth worker does a runner and it's his fault that everyone is dead. Just die with the rest of your people. You're working at a secret government facility with dangerous shit. Don't murder the rest of the world because you got scared. Because now your whole family's dead. And everyone else.
I 100% agree with that.
Anyway, the hospital is, super clean, decontaminated or whatever. They perform multiple autopsies. The first one is after 6 days, then another one after, I want to say it was 2 weeks. I didn't write it down. And then another one that was more like a month and a half later.
That's smart as fuck, though, because those are way different states of decomposition.
Totally.
I'm so sorry. Medical mode. I know that this was a woman with a family.
Again, this is a podcast. This is why we're here.
I know, but it's not like a spooky story or this happened in 1920.
But all the autopsies and searching the hospital itself gets basically nothing. There are many different organizations who will get involved. The Riverside Coroner's Office, the California Department of Health and Human Services, and some federal agencies, and the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health.
I hope the CDC.
Technically, I didn't see it listed. No one mentioned it.
Cool.
And notably, an organization, the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories, but we'll get back to them later. So, every test that everyone runs seems to return basically was at normal levels, and there were very few things that were this is elevated, and those things didn't explain what happened.
What was elevated?
3 things that were weirdly elevated. One was an unidentified amine, a derivative of ammonia. That probably contributed to that smell.
I mean, yeah, I would say so, especially since they smelled an ammonia smell.
But one team said that the presence of that amine is probably because her body was breaking down Tigan, an anti-nausea drug. So that's probably why there were that elevated levels.
Oh, okay. So her meds would have affected that level at the very least.
Yeah.
But also, didn't they give her that I thought they gave her the anti-nausea medicine at the hospital.
Well, she had been feeling nauseous for a few days, so she had already taken it most likely.
Oh, got it. I was thinking that she was given it at the hospital, in which case it was like it wouldn't be in your blood supply that much if you had just taken it, but got it. She was on anti-nauseous.
Second thing was nicotinamide, a compound that it's a vitamin B, crucial for human health. That was thrown out at one point as gibberish.
It is.
It's also used in meth. So that was elevated, and it's fairly cheap. So it's in, meth drugs, but there wasn't any evidence that she was on meth itself. We didn't find that. Also, there will be mention of PCP, and there was no evidence that she actually had PCP in her system.
It's just like, these are some of the things that we know that are most common for this very specific, like, if that's elevated, it's usually because of X, Y, or Z.
Yeah. And then the third thing that was elevated and therefore weird was dimethylsulfone. And now we have to talk about chemistry.
I was already looking at the chemistry. I'm like, what?
So the main theory that we'll talk about involves dimethylsulfone, dimethyl sulfoxide, and dimethyl sulfate. I'm going to call them sulfone, DMSO, which is the sulfoxide one, and sulfate. The one that they found elevated in her system, the sulfone one, is a kind of solvent that, is used in industrial places, but also our body produces small amounts of it naturally.
Right.
But it has a quick half-life, and so it's usually out of your system after a few days. But hers had very high levels even in the, later autopsies.
And they checked that she didn't have a tumor, right? I don't know why.
Well, she had cancer.
Yeah, but I mean very specifically pituitary gland, maybe? Okay, so the thing that was making me think pituitary gland is that it's one of those types of tumors that could cause your body to start making a lot more of something or not making as much of something. And I'm wondering if it's the right things, the right combination of things that are being overproduced, if they wouldn't basically cause like some type of noxious toxin together. Like once they're chemically combined, that would then turn that person into like a toxic bomb, basically.
Like perfect storm of...
Yeah, like when it's coming through your skin. Yeah, well, it had to be it would have had to be, but I'm saying I wonder if there's like some chemical combination that we didn't realize would create that effect that is produced within our own body. I mean, it doesn't seem...
I'm going with aliens.
Chip, if you go with aliens, I swear to God, I will come through this computer.
The woman from the Titanic. None of them really showed up anything. Like, there wasn't any mention of a pituitary tumor. But, so, the official cause of death, as we all know, which is the thing that literally kills you, not the manner of death, cause of death was cardiac dysrhythmia, brought on by acute kidney failure, which was brought on by cervical cancer making a urinary blockage.
So that's where they went with the high ammonia, is that it had to have something to do with the urinary tract getting blocked, and then that ammonia was building up more.
They do not connect anything about her death to the chemicals. They release cause of death, heart attack, and the coroner's office is like, okay, case closed. Yep, we don't have to do it. We're good. And everyone's like, no, you have to try and explain what the fuck happened. So everyone's investigating. No one finds anything. And eventually, California's Department of Health and Human Services has a team who does a survey, asks standardized questions of all the staff members. Well, 34 of the 37 staff members, don't ask me why, did an analysis of their answers. This is a quote from an article we'll talk about later. The survey found that those afflicted tended to be women rather than men, as well as people who had skipped dinner that evening rather than those who had a full stomach.
Oh, God. Correlation does not equal causation. Everyone listening at home, if there's one thing that you remember from this episode today...
From our podcast. From life.
Please, correlation does not equal causation.
And with these statistics and their analysis of whatever other questions there were, the California Health Department officially says that the cause of the symptoms for all the staff members was mass hysteria.
Did you see a woman had to stay in the hospital for 10 days?
And another one for 2 weeks.
Men in Black really come in and be like, it's swamp gas. It's swamp gas.
Another quote from that same paper that we'll get to in a second. Reaction to this interpretation was not unanimously favorable, as you can imagine, including the woman Krasinski. She filed lawsuit for various reasons, $6 million. I couldn't find the conclusion of these lawsuits, for the record. But yeah, she was suing for, hey, I didn't imagine it, and also, hey, my workplace, extra endangered me, what the fuck. The mass hysteria theory, it just feels a little bit, I'm fine with the mass hysteria theory in some circumstances, but when you're like, it affected women more than men and also people who had eaten.
Why would they say mass hysteria?
Mass hysteria is a theory.
Nope. I refuse.
So, no one was happy.
All of those people and Elizabeth Proctor.
So, one of the people who had been affected, a Welch respiratory therapist, the respiratory therapist Welch had been collecting pieces of information this whole time. Here's some newspaper articles. Here is a coroner's report. Here's a toxicology. Here's a legal brief. Many people unhappy. She sent her notebook of information to the Livermore National Laboratory, who they were involved. They didn't really find anything conclusive, but she sent this little packet of them with begging, can you please look this over again? Because she felt they were the only one involved without a vested interest. They look over her notebook. They notice that elevated cell phone, and they think about that in conjunction with DMSO, which is the oxide one, and they're like, hey, wait a second. And what if this is what happened? They write up a little brief that hey, we think this might be what happened. This is a possible theory. Maybe. They send that as a preliminary draft to the coroner's office, and the coroner's office is like, hey everyone, here's what happened. That's the explanation, the end. And so the Livermore people write, we emphasize that this proposed explanation is not an unequivocal proof.
It's just this is our theory based on what we know as professionals.
Yeah, we made some guesses.
We didn't get to personally do this autopsy and have involvement in this lab testing, so this is what we can guess at, but we can't prove it in any way.
This is what we've tried to piece together. Maybe someone should look into this. And the coroner's office, who has, been under news media, this got national attention because, oh my god, a woman's body poisoned everyone.
Well, it's Typhoid Mary type of situation. People, I'm guessing, were terrified that there was going to be more of this toxic lady.
But so as far as the official record goes, the coroner's office is like, here's your answer. And that's the end of the official story.
Well,
just to explain what the Livermore team proposed, there's 3 things. Thing 1, Thing 2, and Thing 3. Well, let's call them Thing 1, Thing 2, and Thing 4 because that's how many oxygen are involved. Oxygen 2 is what they found in her system with elevated levels that's used as an industrial solvent, and our bodies produce naturally at lower levels. Thing 1 oxygen, is also an industrial solvent, and it has properties that have some pain-killing effects, but also can make you lose your eyesight. So back in the 60s, people were doing research on it, and they were like, this is a new miracle drug. And then it turns out it fucks with your eyesight. And so the FDA was like, stop that, don't treat people with that. And so it has very narrow cases where it's used as a medication. But people love a home remedy. So people will go to hardware stores and buy Thing 1, DMSO, which is at really high concentration levels because it's used for unsticking things. And they will just use that to treat muscle pain. It's really common in athletes in the 80s would do this.
Like bleach bath. Add a cap full of bleach to a bathtub. It's good for psoriasis, eczema, skin issues.
But is this actually good for anything? Athletes use it for muscle pain. That was not detected on her body. However, the theory is Thing 4, sulfate with 4-oxygen. It's used as a reagent in testing scenarios, which is like they put in this thing with a chemical and they're like, how do you react with this sulfate thing? But also, it's a super deadly nerve gas. And a very little amount can make you very unhappy very quickly. The theory is she had thing 1 and bought it as a treatment for her pain for her cancer. She was given oxygen in the ambulance and then also in the ER, which it turned it into both the thing 2 and thing 4. When her blood went from, warm body to ER room temperature, which is colder than your average room, it super cooled and became super saturated.
It's very close to my pituitary gland theory.
It was. It very was.
But the way that she got those very specific chemicals in her body was different. Obviously, it wasn't something just being overproduced. It makes sense to me. I'm guessing the airborne quality to it is because they're oxygen-based, were able to be transported through the respiratory system.
Well, yeah, the thing 4, the sulfate one, it's used in warfare, or if it hasn't been, it's been talked about, we're gonna.
Mustard gas type of thing?
Yeah, we're talking that sort of conceptually. It sucks, and notably, it'll break down quickly. So they didn't find any proof of thing 4. They didn't measure any D4, but it could, thing 4, D4, whatever. But it could have broken down very quickly back into thing 2, which is the thing they found elevated levels of.
It just makes sense to me, too. It wasn't just that it was a chemical reaction. It was an oxygen-based chemical reaction, and that's why it would be able to transport respiratorily.
Forgot to mention, thing 1, DMSO, when you apply it to yourself topically, it gives you a bit of an oily sheen, and some people report that it's kind of garlicky in smell.
Oh... Mm-hmm. I know that they just proposed it and was like, we think this is what happened. But yeah, it does make sense.
The thing is, there are problems with it, unfortunately.
I think that there's probably problems with any theory.
Well, yeah.
I think that they still obviously would need to take precautions if these symptoms ever came up again, in case it was some type of new disease. That very specific set of circumstances, the chances of it happening again.
You're not hearing me argue too much. Just, we gotta revisit the problems, because they do have some problems with them. Problem 1, really small, not a hurdle at all. The family claims that she was not using DMSO. I have no problem with the idea that either they are trying to protect her in some way, or didn't know because she didn't tell them and didn't want them to know.
I wouldn't tell anyone, especially because if I was doing it for pain, I don't think, knowing stage 4, knowing it could be terminal, I don't think I'd want my family to know how much pain I was in. And I think a lot of people would feel that way. I would never share that information.
Yeah. It's fair. Yeah. Problem 2, this one I mentioned because it's sort of disproven. Some people objected because this tear gas, I say tear gas, a major symptom that'll be notable when you do have exposure to this is eye symptoms, tearing up and burning in the eyes. And initially, there weren't any reports of those, like the initial summation of the symptoms didn't mention that. But then, a later one did show that the people who were having it the worst also reported tearing up, eye problems. So, that's taken care of. The big problem, though, is that the team who proposed this don't know how the chemical reaction would work. Like, it's sort of a, sure, because we've got more oxygen, something could happen, and they mix together and now they're all attached.
It's like medical physics. Literally can't tell you why it happens exactly, but this is definitely what happens and how it would happen if we could prove that. And that's what theoretical physics is before it turns into real physics.
Yeah, that is basically what it is. But then you have scientists, experts in the field, who say, yeah, that's totally possible, and absolutely not, that's impossible. And that's where we get no scientific consensus. Also, there are problems with this theory. What could be some other explanations? The family, Gloria's family, blames the hospital and believes in the cover-up theory. They're trying to push it off on Gloria, but it was actually something the hospital did and fucked up. This I got from fucking BuzzFeed Unsolved because I watched it after I was done researching it, because apparently they did an episode. There supposedly reports that this hospital had issues in 91 and again in 92 with chemical toxins, like sewer gas type of problems. The sister said something to the effect of, I believe if she hadn't gone to that hospital, she'd still be alive. I couldn't find any sources that actually said this hospital definitely got dinged for those things. But, it's not impossible. I'm not against the idea of a cover-up. I also do like this chemistry because it sounds like it makes a lot of sense. All but one of the symptoms on the list that people experienced was on the symptoms of this nerve gas.
And it does make sense to me, too. It makes sense to me that, like, the ones with the worst symptoms would have the eye symptoms. Like, the load matters. Like, how much you're being exposed to whatever it is matters. Like, now we would say, like, viral load.
Well, and they were the ones that reported the smelling of it.
It is a little weird because the one who was in the hospital for 10 days, not 2 weeks, she wasn't actually attending Gloria. She just helped move the body.
Those gashes still could have been released, and she was close to the body.
Yeah, could have been. It's very confusing and weird.
And she was probably exposed for longer.
In the elevator with it, enclosed.
So she was potentially in the elevator next to the body in closed spaces for a longer period of time.
We're coming and going
than
so quickly.
Any one singular one of the other doctors that was in the room.
Yeah, even COVID is, directly reflected like that, with exposure time being a matter of, work environment and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, if you walk past somebody at the grocery store that has COVID, it's not likely. But if you're sitting and chatting with somebody for 15 minutes, it's very likely.
Other theories proposed by the internet, so the best ones.
Yeah. Get to those.
Someone in the hospital is smuggling the meth precursors, not true meth, in oxygen bags. And those oxygen bags get mixed in with the real oxygen bags. No evidence for that one that I've found.
Convoluted, but
also,
I understand how somebody somehow got there.
The symptoms of the meth precursor are similar to the symptoms. But it helps to have, documented cases of this precursor meth being smuggled. Also, Reddit proposed arsenic. She was treating herself with arsenic, and those symptoms sort of match. None of the things seem to have mentioned elevated arsenic. I feel like an autopsy or two might have mentioned it.
My thing is, like, state health department also tested Tanner Barton's blood.
Oh, shit! You said the name!
You know what I'm saying, though? Like, I just feel like unless the CDC or something is doing the autopsy, that they might just be like, oh, this is what our standard test is. I'm sure at some point that in the later test, but also what is the life of arsenic in the bloodstream after like a month and a half when they do like the last autopsies? Like, did it start the first autopsy was done by the local health department, the second by the state, and the third by the CDC or whatever. By the time you get to that higher up and you keep going higher up, are certain things going to still be in the bloodstream?
I know definitely the second time when.
I'm jaded as fuck. I don't trust anybody to run a regular blood
Why would
panel.
you have any particular feelings on that specifically?
I don't know. It's weird.
And then one thing I want to mention, because I don't have any sources, but I don't want to just throw this out because it comes from the family. But supposedly, when they hired a coroner privately to do an autopsy, but
As you absolutely should.
But when he did it, he couldn't come to any conclusions because her organs were mishandled and contaminated with fecal matter, and also her heart was missing.
What?
I said what I said. I don't trust anyone to actually do their job, even if they're dealing with blood, a dead body, a murder, life and death scenario. Do not trust anyone.
See, there are problems.
Is this a theme on this show? That autopsies are useless?
People are useless. Scientific method is useful if implemented correctly, but when used as prescribed, does not ever happen.
It's weird.
The heart missing bit, and
It's weird.
Is wild.
Also, unsubstantiated, but BuzzFeed said it, the literal syringe that was, the guilty party got lost.
Of course.
Oh, like they just threw it in a sharps container after they used it, and there was probably 1 million used needles.
I'm going with she was doing something weird remedy-wise, or something, whether it's that oil thing or whether it's whatever it could have been. But there's definitely some malpractice here. Like, there's just too much weird stuff.
I love a theory that includes the science and the conspiracy.
The reason that I feel like it has to do with the body, just personally, is how immediate it was after these people started treating her specifically, and that people are coming in and going out of the room at different times. If it would have been like a contaminant in the room, then the woman that took her body probably wouldn't have been as exposed if she wasn't in the room. And people that entered that room later, it feels like also would have got
but
sick.
it checks out with oxygen being the factor, the increase of oxygen throughout the period.
If you've heard any other compelling theories about the toxic lady, please let us know about them, because we're very interested in this.
And we do mean compelling.
Compelling.
Also, while you're at it, you can send us anything that you would find compelling for us to take a look at. You can do it by sending it to the Deep Dark Truth Podcast at gmail.com or texting it to the tip line at 313-355-3411.
Until next time,
I'm Winifred Sanderson.
I'm Mary Sanderson.
Sarah Sanderson.
You just listened to the Deep Dark Truth Podcast. See you next time. And remember, your local cryptids want to meet you.